So real quick disclosures here, guys. Audeze did send this out for a review. I'm not being paid, asked, or otherwise influenced to say anything good or bad about this product. All thoughts and opinions are my own. All right, guys.
Day to night. I want to.
Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and welcome to another review. Today we're going to be talking about the LCD GX from Audeze. This is supposed to be a audiophile gaming headphone and it's coming in at $900. So it's definitely probably one of the most expensive dedicated gaming headphones available on the market today. And today I'm going to explore whether or not this is a good gaming headphone, whether or not this is a good audiophile headphone, whether or not it's good or bad at both. But before we further talk about this specific headphone, I do want to talk about gaming and listening to a kind of an audiophile sound signature and why that might be potentially conflicting. Normally you would think that Soundstage and imaging would be the most important things in terms of a gaming performance, but I find that to not always be the case. And there are some examples of this and then some counterexamples of this that I would like to bring up. And these two are going to be kind of the staples for those examples and counterexamples. So we'll go ahead and start with the HD800S. This is about $1,600, not cheap at all. But if you're looking for peak gaming performance, every headphone that I've ever heard, nothing comes close to this in terms of not only the immersion in the world, but also the capability of being able to tell exactly where people are. So you could use this for competitive play over something like the Steel series or the HyperX stuff. This blows that stuff out of the water, but at a very expensive price tag, and you don't get a microphone. It's not really made for gaming, but it is perfect for it. One of the things that allows this headphone to be so good is the wide soundstage and the very precise imaging. And the actual reason why it's conflicting is because a headphone like this, while not as good as the HD800 in terms of total width, is still a very wide and very well soundstaging, very well imaging headphone. But this headphone sucks for gaming. So we're taking two headphones that both have good soundstage, both have good imaging. Now what is slightly confusing about this is that there are headphones that soundstage far smaller than this and don't even image as well as this, but are actually better for gaming. And the GX is one of them. I think that it comes down to the dynamic range, the position of the imaging in the soundstage in terms of what angle things are coming at versus what angle the audio is playing at. So let's go ahead and tackle the first one, talking about dynamic range in different areas. So in my mind, there are basically two major ways to make a good gaming headphone. You can make an immersive headphone that is just engrosses you in the world, or you can make a headphone that is, I don't necessarily want to say accurate for the position, but it's something that you can reliably base where people are. The locatability factor for competitive play is very high. In the headphones that I've tested, there are two, maybe three headphones on the market that I think do both. The HD800S, the DT1990, and the DT880 are able to do the immersion factor and the accuracy of position factor. Now, if you want immersion, I think it's good to have something like this or like the Aria that is very dynamic. So it can be very quiet and very loud. But if you're playing purely competitive, I actually think the less dynamic range you have within reason is a little bit better for a couple specific reasons. One, you still want your locatability in terms of your imaging position to be fairly accurate. But the reason why you'd want your dynamic range to be less is so that faraway footsteps are still obvious. Now, if the dynamic range is accurate, those faraway footsteps are going to be very, very quiet. So ideally, you'd want something with a limited dynamic range where faraway things and quiet things are actually presented fairly loud, but you'd also want them to be able to have a good positional kind of illusion where you still hear them loudly, but you can tell how close they're getting to you. And this is something that is honestly very, very hard to do. And in my opinion, there's not really a headphone that does it perfectly. And the problem with this is that this type of sound signature, while great for competitive play for gaming, has an opposite effect for music. It is not very accurate or audiophile-like in terms of sound signature. You don't want something with super compressed dynamics, at least in my opinion and what I look for, and I think what a lot of other people look for. So right away, we kind of have two butting heads in terms of capability of gaming and capability of reproducing music accurately. Now, the other factor that I was talking about was the position of the imaging in the soundstage. So you can have something like the Aria that is very wide and has a lot of depth to it, but I actually don't consider the kind of 360-degree position to be as finite as on the 800, and that's part of what edges the 800 out a little bit more. So you get this very wide scope of sound, and it sounds very kind of just giant kind of globe around your head. But when somebody is coming from, let's say, 45 degrees or 47 degrees, there's a very clear distinction between those 2 points. And not only that, but the imaging in terms of the position, how close and far it is to you, is very good on the HD800S. Now, I bring all these things up to kind of lay the groundwork for the GX because while I do think it is a very good gaming headphone, I don't really like it as an audiophile headphone. I think it should just be listed as like a premium gaming headphone because I think that's corely what it is. Now, it does have some things about the sound signature that are honestly fantastic in terms of music, but I think the main core performance is in the gaming spectrum. So for $900, you get the cheapest version of this build from Audeze. And I don't mean cheap as in quality, I just mean cheap as in price. Every other headphone from this build is actually substantially more in the Audeze lineup. And I actually think this is a superior build to their more older school style of planar construction for the chassis. And for a couple reasons. One, I think the chassis is a little bit stronger being metal on the outside rather than a ring of wood or plastic and then having like a separate grille. Like the outside grille is all kind of one piece. It's also quite a bit lighter and you still get these awesome, luxurious, thick pads, this nice headband that contours to like most people's heads, a wide variability in terms of head height and shape, and these really large and deep ear cups. So all in all, especially with the weight reduction over some of the other Audeze products, this thing is really, really comfortable to use. And I actually quite like the build a lot. And of all Audeze products that I have reviewed, although I haven't reviewed a lot with this current build, this is the most comfortable. I prefer it over the LCD1, which is a very lightweight headphone, but just the pads and everything are just so much more comfortable on this than that. I prefer it over the 2, the X, the 3, and the 4. Now, another benefit to the GX is that it's a really efficient planar headphone. So it's got a sound pressure level of about 100 dB per milliwatt, and it's only 20 ohms. So you can run this off of really anything. And especially if you're using a kind of a gaming interface like a Shit Hell or a Shit Fola or a GX 1000, those interfaces are going to be able to run this very easily and sound very, very good. Don't need a lot of power. And that's actually a pretty big benefit. Now, notably, in the last parts on this build here, it does come with 2 cables. One is going to be the gaming cable with a dedicated microphone, which I'll do a sound test in a second. It doesn't sound very good. I don't necessarily recommend it, but it does come with it and you don't have an option for that. And then it comes with a standard braided Audeze cable, and that one works just fine. And it also comes with a hard Pelican style carry case. So this is the Audio GX microphone. I'm gonna move it into a couple different positions. There's not a whole lot of positions that you can do to make this sound really, really good. In my opinion, it's not really the best. So it definitely could be better. There's some definite room for improvement. I also have a window open over there, so it should be blocking out some of the background noise if it's any good. It's definitely decent for that. It's really only going to pick up what's happening right here, but it could be better. Now this microphone is a little bit hot in the S's in my opinion and sounds quite nasally. And unfortunately, I think for $900, it's not really what I would expect in terms of the quality from an audio company dedicated to high quality sound like Audeze. So that part is a bit disappointing in my opinion.
That's why we have fire teams.
So as far as sound signature goes, this is primarily a mid-range focused headphone, which is kind of interesting and quite a bit different than something like the HD800S. And you really get to see the two different styles of kind of sound approach, kind of sound delivery, how those two different styles can still have an effective gaming experience. Although I still think the HD800 takes it. Now, when it comes to the treble response, put simply, the resolution capabilities of this headphone are exceeded by quite a few headphones in the price category and lower. And especially when it comes to the treble response, it's beat out by the 2C, the DT1990, the HD660S, the LX, and even Audeze's own LCD1, which is a significantly cheaper headphone. Now, for the application of a gaming headphone, I actually don't think that top-end resolution is really necessary or even always desired, because oftentimes it can be kind of fatiguing. It's not very often that those real top-end frequencies above like 10, 12, 15K really matter for locating an enemy in a game. Now, when it comes to the mid-range performance, this mid-range is actually awesome. And not just for gaming, actually listening to music on this for the vocals specifically, it's just lovely. It's super lush, it's super rich, and it reminds me a lot more of the LCD2C than something like the LCD-X or an LX or something of that nature. Now, it's not gonna be exactly perfect, but it's definitely in line with what I would consider my personal preferences to be. I really, really enjoy it. Now, bass response in the $900 category also, unfortunately, for music does not compete with what I would expect from a planar at this price range, but it's certainly enough to like feel explosions, to hear the bass notes. Some games will mix kind of lower footstep notes in, and you want to be able to locate the directionality of the bass response. And for that, this is quite good. But where the real interest for this headphone for me is going to be kind of the imaging and the soundstage delivery and those dynamics that I was talking about. So this is a very compressed sounding planar. It doesn't have a lot of lively high and low peaks in any particular area. It doesn't have a very strong sense of dynamic range where certain things are going to be real low and certain things are going to be real loud, like you would expect for something like an LCD2C or an LCD-X, where it's got that dynamic capability. This doesn't have that, but I actually think it plays a little bit to the benefit of the purpose of this planar. So when you put this headphone on, and yes, it's pretty big, the soundstage and the imaging illusion of headphones does not extend beyond the cups. Everything is kind of happening in here, and there's not much happening outside. Now, the distance of the imaging in the soundstage, if you're familiar with it, is very reminiscent of the LCD-X, not so much like the LCD2C. The 2C is quite a bit wider than both of these. This is actually even slightly more narrow than the X is. But what this is able to do that the X can't and the LCD2C can't is tell you precisely where enemies are a little bit better. And it's got better and more specific directionality on a round kind of a scale of sound. So if something's happening behind you rather than in front of you, it's going to be a little bit more obvious on this than it will be on the X. Now, another reason why this is good for gaming is because of that dynamic compression. So like I was talking about before, is there's kind of two schools of thought. You would want something with a large dynamic range to be able to tell you distance if it's able to use that to its benefit for locatability, but it has to be matched with a bunch of other things like accurate imaging in terms of the degrees of the incoming attack or something like that. Now with this, the compression and the imaging area, I actually think is really well suited to first-person shooters specifically, but a certain type of first-person shooter. So areas that I thought this handled best was low player count, fast-paced games. So things like Apex Legends are a yes. Things like Call of Duty are a yes. Things like Battlefield, where you're playing with these huge player counts and you're gonna have like 15, 20 people really close in proximity to you at pretty much all times. I felt like those people got a little bit lost in the mix in this, and that's where something like the HD800S is really going to stand out, is being able to specifically locate a ton of people at the same time. This gets a little bit busy, and I think that's just because of the capable area in which it works in. Now, oddly enough, the style of delivery of the sound is most closely resembled by the Sennheiser PC37X gaming headphone. So there's a lot of people familiar with that, and that's kind of the closest I can I can recall the actual delivery of the sound. This is a lot more specific than that. It's got a little bit more bass than that, and the quality of the sound is noticeably better than that headphone, and the build is a lot better as well. But microphone's actually better on the PC37X, oddly enough. But that's kind of the closest in terms of performance. So if you have tried that headphone, I know a number of people who are like, on that headphone, but there's a lot more that really enjoyed that headphone, myself included. I think that's a fantastic gaming headphone for the money. DMS, for example, also really enjoys that headphone. And that's kind of the style of performance you can expect from this, except just with the enhanced sound quality itself. Okay, now to talk about actual performance, I want to completely level with you guys here. Up to a certain point, I don't think that better and better headphones will make you a noticeably better player. It may help you in one particular area or another one, but if a headphone has decent imaging or decent soundstage and a decent combination of both and it's reasonably accurate, I think a good player is still going to be a good player, a great player is still going to be a great player. I don't think you're going to see these massive leaps and bounds. And that actually goes with almost all gaming hardware in general. Mice, keyboards, headphones, even the refresh rate of your monitor. Like somebody who is really good at 60 Hertz is still going to be really good at 120 Hertz. They're not going to make these massive jumps up to some pro level with the addition of some gear. Most of it is time, most of it is practice. So some concluding statements. Is this worth the money? Like, pure and simple, is it worth it? If you're into the Audeze sound signature and you listen to music over movies, if you're anything over 50-50 from music, if you're like 60-40, 70-30, then I would stick with a 2C or an X, whatever fits your budget a little bit better. If you're a little bit on the top end of your budget, get the 2C. And if you're a little bit under budget, get the X for the $1,200 creator package price. Now, if you're below 50-50 for music, so if you're like 60-40 for gaming or 70-30 for gaming, I think this is actually a legitimate option if you're looking for kind of an all-in-one setup that you're gonna use for both. Now, for music, it's fairly good, especially if you listen to a lot of vocal-based music. This is gonna be really enjoyable. It's not the top of the line for music though. And I do think some of those other options that I named before and linked in the description are probably going to be a little bit better suited for that. I want to send a huge thanks to Audeze for sending this out for a review. I want to thank you very much for watching, and until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.
Tequila.